I would love for us today to talk about perfectionism and high achievement in a way where we utilize ACT as sort of a container to explore it, but also how you maybe have gotten tripped up by it in your own life and
Sure.
why you're studying this, why you're doing this work. One thing that I like to do when I start therapy with clients is to ask them about what is it that they care about that brought them here. It's really interesting because oftentimes when you're struggling with something, you want to talk about all the things that you're struggling with, and you don't see that there's something underneath it that you deeply care about. So I want to ask that of you as we're talking about perfectionism and high achieving behaviors today. What is it that you care about, Dr. Z, that brought you to this work?
Wow, that's such a beautiful question. I think in my heart, I'm a relationship person. I'm all about connecting with others. I'm all about building long lasting relationships and working through things with people, with them, next to them, behind them. And I think in some way, my whole life has been around that in my personal life, in my career. So I value creating intimacy and connecting in a real way with people and having depth in my relationships. And I think that when I think of therapy, many times behavior therapists will get accused of not paying attention to the relationship, being very focused on the worksheets. But reality is that we're actually very attuned with the person that is in front of us. To me, feels like we are dancing, right? Sometimes the dance goes smooth and soft, sometimes we move fast, sometimes we have to slow down. But there is a lot that is happening with the person that we're working with. And it's such an intimate and rich conversation in every session. It's never perfect or clean, right? But the degree of intimacy that we get to have with the people that we work with really speaks to my heart. Getting to understand another person, where they are in a given context, how they become to be who they are, has been important in my life. So I think that's something that I deeply, deeply care in my life, in my friendships, and in the work with my clients.
So when you're talking about caring about intimacy and that's what drives a lot of your work, it makes me think about how when we care deeply about something and then we enter into a work situation or a relationship, we want to achieve that thing, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, I think about for myself early on as a therapist, how much I got actually more rigid in the therapy room because
Mhm.
I wanted to do a good job. And actually, that rigidity can interfere with our intimacy or can interfere with our value. And what I want to talk to you today about is something that I've been contemplating a lot in my own life, which is this concept of how to achieve things that you care about, pursue, have
Mhm.
that sort of effort, wise effort towards meaningful goals without getting sidetracked by our mind, by our not good enoughness, and all these things
Mhm.
that get in the way. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I know that your work is centering around this concept right now, too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very thoughtful reflection. And here is my take on that. And I don't have the truth with capital T. I just can tell you about my experience personally, struggling also with high achieving behaviors as an immigrant, as a woman, as a person that has to prove herself in a professional environment, and as a clinician. I think what I have encountered a lot in my life, both personally and professionally, is that we tend to think of different psychological struggles in a binary way as dichotomous constructs. Either people has this or not, sweet and sour, angels and demons. And if you look at the literature about perfectionists, and this has been happening the last 20 years, most of the times, this may sound very strong, but I think most of the times the message has been to demonize perfectionistic actions. It's bad, you have to drop your standards, let it go, as it will be so easy to do so. When behaviors, as we know, have been reinforced multiple times, and doing things right and perfect pays back feels good to get things right, feels good to get an A, feels good to be appreciated by others, they are hard to let go. They're just hard to let go. So I encountered that in my life personally, and I encountered through the stories working with my clients. They experience the same type of message. They have to drop their standards. The challenge is that it's not easy to let go when you deeply care about things. And I think in my experience, again, most of the clients that I have worked dealing with perfectionistic actions or high achieving behaviors, they're actually very attuned with their values. They're actually very in
Mhm.
touch with what deeply, it's what really, really matters to them. The challenge is that they are they get very attached sometimes to one outcome or to one way of doing things. We both know that within ACT, if my value is to create intimacy, there are different ways for me to do so. I may ask you how you're doing, what are you afraid of these days, what really moves you today. I may ask similar questions to my mom. I may write a letter to my friends, sharing with them what I have been struggling with the last couple of months. So there are different ways in which I can live my value of creating intimacy. But I think when people are prone to high achieving behaviors and they don't check, they are attached to one way of living that value, right? Then, like if my value, let's say, is disseminating evidence-based skills in a compassion action way, but I only think that the only way to do that is by writing the book. I'm going to put on my energy, write until 3 a.m., wake up the next day, drink a lot of coffee, and I do the same. It may look like I'm living my value, but what's happening to my health? What's happening to my body? What's happening to my friends that are saying, Patricia, we want to see you, or to your partner that wants time with you? So I think that it is tricky but not impossible to distinguish when we're truly living our values and when we are attached with one outcome and we attach to one way of living the value and we're losing ourselves.
So the message is so beautiful there that you don't have to let go of your value. And that's what I think a lot of times folks come in, we're afraid this perfectionism is working for me and I'm a high achiever. I like being a high achiever. It's actually something that I feel pride around,
Mm-hmm.
but it has all these consequences when I get rigid. So the idea is not to let go of the value, but rather it's to hold it and handle it in a different way, in a more cognitively fluid way and a more open to possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
That you can continue to live your values, but do so in a way that's more effective, maybe more efficient as
Yes.
well, and also more expansive. And I think that that's what ACT really offers us. And I also think for me, I've actually really been influenced by yogic philosophy and Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
philosophy in this area. So in Buddhism, there's these four noble truths that map
Mm-hmm.
on to ACT, right? So the four noble truths have to do with life is uncomfortable, and the cause of our suffering has to do with our attachment to things, our aversion from things we don't like, and from our delusions, our beliefs
Mm-hmm.
that we get hooked into, which is very much maps onto the model of ACT. And in that four noble truths, there's an eightfold path, which is your path to freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the items on that eightfold path is skillful, wise effort. And I think that when we're talking about working with ACT and high achievers, it's how do you actually get more skillful at your achieving and not as much about letting go of your achievement. And that's something that I'm really trying to do in my life because I've had such a long history of actually having my high achievement take me down personally and has really caused a lot of suffering for me, both physically
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how I worked with my body, but also in my relationships, in my family. And I want to keep achieving, but I want to do so more skillfully. Let's talk about some of the things that you use and apply in terms of these skills of ACT with high achievement.
Yana, I am having a curiosity here, and let me know if it's okay to ask, because I think what you shared is very personal and it's beautiful. And I don't know if it's okay if I can ask a question.
Yes, we're building intimacy. Let's do it.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So you mentioned something really moving here, that you in your life have experienced how perfectionism cause your health and affect your relationships. But here you are today, striving,
Mhm.
creating your podcast. You have published the ACT journal. You have been researching and writing on striving behaviors. What was your experience? How did you make that shift from engaging in perfectionistic actions to the point that your life, yourself got affected to where you are today, in which you are expanding and you are living with so much, I think, fluidity and organicity right now?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you could ask my friends and family. It's always so fluid and organic, but I think, it's been a process. I mean, that's the title of this podcast is Your Life in Process, and it's been a process. It's more of an accordion, kinda sometimes I get hooked by it and I come back in and I get rigid, and a lot of it has been, using these principles that I'm learning from ACT and really embodying them. So, first is tuning into my body
Mm-hmm.
and noticing what it feels like getting a sense of what it feels like when I am caught up in unhealthy striving. It feels contracted, it
Mm-hmm.
feels forced, it feels like I'm holding my breath, and it feels like I'm putting out a lot of effort and getting more exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And yoga has taught me a lot about that because I've also had the experience of forcing my body through exercise. And yoga is a different way of relating to the body, right? When I'm not in that state and I'm practicing more of doing things that are driven by my values and letting go of the outcome and just really kind of throwing stuff at the wall, let go of my sense of self so that I can be more myself, right? The
Mm-hmm.
less that I hold on to a sense of self, the more I get to be myself.
Mm-hmm.
How that feels in my body is expansive, a sense of vitality and energy,
Mm-hmm.
and also just this like freedom to be creative and go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I come from that place and my self story is going to keep on going, it's just
Mm-hmm.
always in the background. My mind is always in the background. But when I move towards that expansiveness and that willingness to just open up and allow, then all of a sudden I can create things. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is self care and putting some containers and boundaries around things. And that's something that I'm continuing to work on because we live in a world where we can be working 24/7
Yeah.
and our work is in our pocket. So that's another thing that I think is really important for especially achievers at this point in time in modern society is that you can love something so much, but then you can overdo it because you love it so much.
That's right. That's right. So it's beautiful to hear that for you, it started by noticing how it feels in your body. And that was in some way the beginning of many of the shifts you have been making. My journey has been perhaps similar and a little bit different too. You asked at the beginning, what's my personal story with the striving and perfectionistic behaviors? And the reality is that I'm an immigrant. I'm coming from a working class family, and I think our academic environment and professional environment, as friendly and cozy as it could be, also has some degree of competitiveness, right? Who is doing what? Who is writing what? And I know for me, when I was in grad school, as a person who has English as a second language, my mind had the thought: Will I make it here? Will I be a successful professional? Who is going to see a therapist that has an accent? And the response was to work hard and hard and hard, right? But interestingly, when I start breathing and living up the skills, one of the things I started noticing was this urge to do more, to write more, to
Mhm.
work harder. And for me, when I tap into that urge, that was the beginning of identifying a choice point in which I have to step back. And instead of going along with that urge and do more or stay very late, right? Or make sure that I clean the apartment and look super impeccable, I step back and check what's really behind this. Is this driven by my value because I care about disseminating act skills? Or what is really, really behind this? Am I trying to run away from these fears of being a failure, these fears of not being good enough? So for me, I started by checking my urge that comes with doing more, working hard, pushing more, and then checking what's behind, checking what's really driving this urge, right? So I think that was a choice point, and that's something I try to teach my clients. And then from that choice point, I really try to make room for the imperfections that comes with every single thing we do. I have learned to radically accept that every single day I'm breathing and I'm working on something, something is going to go wrong and off. Like this morning, right now at IG Live, I couldn't hear what you were saying, right? So in the past, my mind will have gone to, okay, Patricia, you have to get this right, test the equipment like 3 times, 7 times. Reality is that every human being, we are doing the best we can in a given situation, and that's the best we can do. And something most of the times is going to go wrong and off. I don't like it, I can assure you that. I will hope that it doesn't go wrong, but that's the life that we're living. So making room for the imperfections, unpredictable situations, unplanned circumstances that come has been extremely helpful. This sounds a little bit silly, but I can tell you my life is liberated when I wake up every day and I say, who knows what's going to go wrong today, right? Because something is going to go wrong. So I think that was a different mindset to learn to harness my drive to do things right and to manage my own fears of being a failure and not making it in this country.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting when we look at how we have learned to cultivate this proneness to do things right, to achieve striving without losing ourselves or losing our bodies.